Hey folks, welcome to the Ramble. Here's something I don't say on this channel very often these days. And now in local news. If you're curious as to whether or not Hagerstown is still a shithole full of racists, it is. And that is sadly exemplified by this story. It's about our mayor, or their mayor, I should say. Technically, I'm not a resident of Hagerstown anymore, so he's not my mayor, but he's the mayor of Hagerstown. Bob Brucci, on Facebook in a response to someone posting something about Trump's visit to the UK, Brucci, the mayor of Hagerstown, said, well, I don't blame Trump for not going to visit there back in January. Why would he want to go to London when that terrorist is the mayor over there? Speaking, of course, about the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is not a terrorist. He is a Muslim. He's the first Muslim elected mayor of London. Brucci claims, and this is still his claim, that his terrorist comment about Sadiq Khan was not intended in any way as a reference to his religion. Even though, of course, the really ugly, horrible stereotype about Muslims that is pushed and perpetuated to this day by right-wingers particularly is that Muslims are terrorists, or they have a stronger predilection toward terrorism, or Muslims are more likely to be terrorists by the mere fact of their being Muslims. These are all these really, really gross, awful ideas that are pushed about Muslims, mostly by people on the right and by people like Sam Harris, who claim they're not on the right, but happily push these bullshit talking points with a great deal of enthusiasm anyway. Thankfully, there are still enough good people living in Hagerstown and in the surrounding areas to take him to task for this. Of course, there were plenty of people defending him too, but there were enough people to complain about it that it became a little bit of a controversy, and Brucci has apologized. He continues to insist, despite his apology, that it wasn't a crack about Islam or Muslims. But he has said that he's sorry, he shouldn't have said it. And I'll give him a little bit of extra credit. He met with our local Muslim community. Some of these people are Mayor Brucci's constituents. And needless to say, they were not too thrilled about his comments, despite his insistence that it wasn't a Muslim thing at all. He wasn't meaning to insult anybody's religion. But to Mayor Brucci's credit, after he apologized, he did go and meet with local Muslims at the mosque, the Hagerstown Mosque, which is the Islamic Society of Western Maryland. And from the reporting I've read about it, there's an article about it in the Herald Mail that I read just before sitting down in front of the camera. It sounds like a fairly positive meeting. It sounds like Brucci is really determined to make amends and to foster a positive relationship with the Muslim community. It's a shame that it took him saying something horrible about the mayor of another city to inspire him to reach out to the Muslim community and to try to build a better relationship. But hey, if the result is something positive, if the result is something good for Hagerstown and specifically for the Muslim community of Hagerstown, then I think that's wonderful. All good things, terrific. It does annoy me that he is still insisting that the comment had nothing to do with Sadiq Khan's religion. It really gets on my nerves, because if you're really going to apologize and you really want to make amends, you need to acknowledge the thing that you did that was wrong. You need to acknowledge why what you said was offensive to people, and you can't do that if you're pretending to mean something than what you obviously meant. Because of course it was a comment about Khan's religion. What the fuck else was he talking about? What other reason would Bob Brucci, mayor of Hagerstown, Trump supporter, have to make a crack about Sadiq Khan being a terrorist other than referencing that bullshit, repugnant stereotype about Muslims being terrorists? What other reason is there? What other link, real or imagined, to terrorism does Sadiq Khan have? There's no other reason other than to make it a knock at the guy's religion. That's obviously what Brucci was doing, and even though he has apologized, he doesn't have the fucking guts to admit what he actually said. If you're going to apologize, then do it right. Apologize for real. Own what you said, admit what you said and what you meant, your intended meaning behind those words, and then apologize and say, I'm really sorry. Admit that you have those attitudes, because it's obvious you do. Admit that you have some prejudice against Muslim people, and that you're going to work on it. Acknowledge it. Put it out in the open. Say, you know what? I have these prejudices. I have these stereotypes in my head. I have been susceptible to a lot of these ideas, a lot of these awful, ugly things that have been said about Muslims, about Muslim people, and I'm sorry. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to acknowledge that I have these biases, I have these prejudices, and I'm going to make an effort to better myself, to fix my fucking attitude, to become a friend to the Muslim community, to allow them to show me who they are, and I'm going to do better from now on. That would be wonderful, but that's not what he did. He apologized, which is great, but he refuses to admit that what he said was a prejudiced statement against Muslims and was a perpetuation of a really, really ugly and harmful stereotype against Muslims. I first became aware of the existence of a Muslim community in the Hagerstown area in, I believe it was 2006. I was in college. I had gone back to college because, as many of you know, I went back to school at a relatively late age. I was in my mid-20s when I actually went to college. I had worked for a few years after high school, and I went back to college. And the first 2 years of my college were at Hagerstown Community College. And one of the best classes I took there was a religion class, a world religion class. And one of the things that we did in the world religion course that made it so interesting was we would have guest speakers come in representing different local faith communities. And we had a woman come in who was Jewish and tell us about the Jewish religion. And we had a woman come in who was actually a refugee from Somalia. And she was studying medicine. She wanted to be, I believe she wanted to be a nurse. And she was Muslim, and she came to talk to us about her experience as a Muslim and her take on Islam and her faith. And I remember sitting there listening to her and watching her, and she spoke on her own for a little while, and then she took questions and stuff. And I remember thinking, you know, this is a person who is a stranger in a strange land, who is an immigrant here, a refugee who came here under not great circumstances, came escaping hardship in her homeland, and was settled here. And she's a minority, she's a racial minority, she's an ethnic minority, she's a religious minority, she's a woman. And yet here she is standing in front of a group of mostly white, I think in that class it was all white except for her, mostly white Americans, Christians, not of her faith. And here she is representing her and her people and her culture and her religion with such class and with such intelligence and such grace. And I was just so impressed with her. And I thought, how many of us could do the same thing? How many of us would be able to do what she's doing? How many of us could go to another country where we would be among the most underprivileged members of the society that we were visiting? How many of us in that situation would be able to stand up and speak for ourselves and represent where we come from and represent our religion as gracefully and as powerfully as she did for us? I don't know. Some of us could, but not all of us could. Like, that's a hard thing. Public speaking is hard anyway. And imagine being a public speaker, speaking in not your native language, speaking in not your native country, in a culture that you are a transplant to, speaking about your religion, which is a minority religion, and not just a minority religion, but post 9/11 especially, an incredibly mistrusted religion and persecuted religion in this country. How many of us could do what she did? She deserves better. All of the people in her community, all of the people who came here, not just to the United States, but through choice or just the winds of fortune, wound up in this area, wound up in Western Maryland, in Washington County, in the Hagerstown area. She deserves better than Bob fucking Brucci. And she deserves better than the people who elected him. The people who put him where he is, the people who continue to defend him, and the people who are going to accept his apology, which I'm not trying to undersell. I think it's good that he apologized. But there are a lot of people, whether they voted for him or not, who are just going to accept that and say, well, there, what more do you want from him? There, he apologized, okay? As if it's some kind of a fucking game. As if when somebody says something intolerant in public, once they go through the motions and they do what's expected of them, it's incumbent on all of us to forgive them because that's the game. He said what he was supposed to say. He said he was sorry. He met with the president of the Islamic Society of Western Maryland. He talked to him for like an hour. He said he wants to work with him. I mean, what more do you want from him? Well, time will tell. I hope something positive comes from it. I really do. But from where I sit, judging this area, judging the people of this area by the prevailing opinions that I've seen my entire life, I think that the Muslim community, I think that the refugee community, I think that minority communities in general in this area deserve a lot fucking better than what they've got. They deserve better than him, and they deserve better than us, than we who are the privileged, we who are in the majority, we who all too often look at them as a burden, look at them with suspicion, look at them as though they're taking up space that somehow belongs to somebody else, that they're using up resources that somehow belong to somebody else. They deserve a lot better than the ignorance and the prejudice that they have to face every day. And they deserve a lot better than the motherfucker who's sitting in the White House, who has made it one of the central goals of his administration to dry up immigration and to block refugees and asylum seekers from coming to this country. They deserve better than that. We all deserve better than that, but especially them. And the sad part is, they're probably not going to get it. The best they can hope for in the near future, I'm sad to say, is someone like Bob Brucci, just the absolute epitome of an unimpressive, mediocre fucking white man who rose to the top in large part because nobody else wanted to do his fucking job. All they're going to get is people like him saying something awful, getting called out on it, getting in trouble for it, apologizing, but apologizing just only as much as he has to. Not acknowledging what he actually did that was wrong, not acknowledging the attitudes and prejudices in him that caused him to say it. Just, oh yeah, boy, that was a shame that I said that. I'm really sorry I said that. I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to say that. I really shouldn't have said that. It's something I'm very sorry. Had nothing to do with Muslims, though. They deserve better than that. But sadly, that's probably the best they're going to get for a while.